Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the fifth annual Breakfast with Richey. And let me start off with a shout out to my friend Lou Gallo in Knoxville, Tennessee. And of course, my friends at the Webb School and those people too, Miss Rowcliffe students. Just got a text from Lou and hoping all his kids do great. And that's awesome. So, we'll go ahead and, just shouting out to great people. And let me just make sure see if he's watching. Yeah. So I let Twitter know we're here and all of that. Make sure, ladies and gentlemen, that you start off your tweets. Now, remember that questions are going to get priority if you follow me and if you use the hashtag Dragon Energy in your tweet. Remember, that's the theme for today. When you need to muster that energy to write a DBQ or an LEQ, thinking Dragon Energy, for good luck, write that on your paper somewhere. You can cross it out so they can't score it. Just a nice little gag for our little community, okay? But Dragon Energy, ladies and gentlemen, and it's going to be so awesome. And so let me give a quick shout out to Braintree Cross Country. I'm just going to pretend that it's cold outside for a little while. I'm going to wear this hoodie as long as I can. I mean, if a school's going to send me a hoodie, I'm going to represent. So there we go, Braintree Cross Country. And in fact, when AP season's over, I need to start getting back into shape. So I think this hoodie is a very nice gift, and I very much appreciate it. And, I'm repping Arkansas High School under here, and maybe we'll see that later. So let me go ahead and go to Twitter. Now, I'll be doing some Instagram shout outs as well, at Tom Richey. And shout out, yes, to Miss Feast and her bunch who are watching in Kenosha, Wisconsin at Christian Life School. I'm so glad that y'all are there. And so we're going to be on Instagram. Now, also on my Instagram story, I've got details on our little gag this year, okay? Mr. Covington's class is watching. Good to see. But if you look at my Instagram story, we've got the gag here. Okay, that as far as it's just a little joke. It's not something that's supposed to distract you or anything like that. Just a little something to put a little fun into the DBQ, LEQ, and get you excited. Okay, and then a shout out to Bryn and Josie. Out there out there in Twitter and Instagram and in Summerville, South Carolina. Bren, thank you so much for your support and your memes and all that. I hope y'all are taking a push next year. Great group. Okay. And with that, Bren wanted me to talk about the new imperialism, or as she called it, neo-imperialism. So let me go ahead. And I think one thing that's important here is to set up some context. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at some context here for the new imperialism. Now, first of all, we want to make sure that we can compare and contrast, like to differentiate this with the so-called old imperialism of the age of exploration. So when you think about the age of exploration, the 15th through the 18th century, and then imperialism really starting in about the 1870s and going through World War I. So late 19th century, or you might think turn of the 20th century. Remember, you don't always have to know years, but decades are good. And even some things, if you can get it into a 40 or 50 year period, that's another thing that I think is important. So let me go ahead and lay down a little context, okay, for the new imperialism, which is something I don't have a proper lecture on yet, but I have gotten started on some things. Now, one thing, I've got a short video on the Second Industrial Revolution that is maybe worth taking a look at, especially if you're, if you've got some time afterwards, because I'm going to finish between 11 and 11:30. And so those of you on the West Coast may have some time to look at that. The Second Industrial Revolution is very important. And I'm going to go into that here. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and take a look at the new imperialism, or Europe meets the world. Okay, so first of all, the first industrial revolution, as I said, you can get a little bit more in depth on the video I've got on the second industrial revolution, but we want to make sure what we've got here is steam power, textiles, and factories. Okay, and stay hydrated, kids. And I tell you, also much respect to everybody who's watching, who is observing Ramadan right now and is taking this test without any water. Just tons of respect for you, and hopefully you're hydrated, and I hope that you do very well. I can't imagine that. So as far as that goes, the second industrial revolution. So we've got here now, note about 1750 to 1830, the first industrial revolution. So we have a little bit of a break here. And what I've got here is the spinning jenny. Remember that when we're talking about something, it's a good idea to have, some kind of illustrative example. So as an illustrative example of the technology here for the first industrial revolution, I would go into the spinning jenny and textiles and that sort of thing. You go into the water frame, those sorts of inventions, steam power, textiles, factories. Now, so 1750 to 1830. Now, the second industrial revolution starts around 1850. Generally, the Crystal Palace exhibition marks the beginning of the so-called second industrial revolution. And this is what is leading us to World War I. You think about World War I is really the culmination of the second industrial revolution. So if World War I is known for it, then, that is something that, would be some, when you think about railroads, ships, electricity, heavy machinery. Remember also chemical warfare in World War I. So they're experimenting with chemicals and petroleum. And so we see, instead of just the steam engine, also the internal combustion engine. And what's happening here is that, the gap between Europe and the rest of the world, or, when you think about it by this time, Europe and North America, but Europe and North America, and of course, also Japan and Australia, let's not leave them out. But, that we have the West and the westernizing countries that are getting to be leaps and bounds over the rest of the world. And we see here the conquest of distance, okay, that we see that the world is getting smaller. Transcontinental railroads being built in the United States and in Russia and also throughout Europe, that they've got this Bessemer process that is making it easier to create steel in mass quantities. And so a transatlantic telegraph wire is, there in 1858. So now you can communicate between Europe and North America very, very quickly. During this time also, we see the building of canals, the Suez Canal in 1869, the Panama Canal finished in 1914, right before World War I. Now, another thing to note here is when we think about some of the motivations for the new imperialism. And so one of the motivations for the new imperialism is to protect investments, okay? And so the British, get into the Suez Canal, and then they're thinking that, they're thinking as far as that goes, that the Suez Canal, we don't need the Egyptians messing this up. So the British come in here and set themselves up here. They get the government into debt and they get in here to protect their investments. So if Europeans are going to make investments, then they want those to be protected. So we want to think about motivations. And my friends in Miami, Miss Marino's class at Archimedean, and then, of course, Miss Lanzie's bunch at Coral Gables. And Alex, I have not forgotten about you. There are lots of Alex's, but Alex knows who I'm talking to. Have not forgotten about you and will be in touch. And thank y'all so much for your support in the Miami AP Euro community. Just really awed by the kindness that y'all have shown me time and time again. Thank you so much. And, for all the good food and the coffee, for the Cordelito or whatever that was. I think I said it somewhat right, at least passably. And so another thing that's going on here during this time is what we call the European diaspora, where we see Europeans, which this is the time, if you want to think about U.S. history, for those of you who've had that we call this the time of the new immigrants. There are immigrants coming to the United States from Southern and Eastern Europe. And so for European history, Europeans are going all over the globe and projecting themselves out, going to North America, South America, particularly to South Africa. There really aren't a lot of European settlement colonies in Africa, but South Africa does attract quite a bit of European settlement in particular. And then Australia, and then, of course, going into Siberia as well, that at this time, 40%, nearly 40% of the world's population in 1914 was of European descent, which that is a lot different than today, okay? That when you see this, that the world's concentration of population today is in South and Southeast Asia, in China and India. You see also Japan, very dense population there. So, that has changed a lot. But at the turn of the 20th century, about 40% are of European descent. And then, as I said, we've got this difference between the developed versus the developing world. Today, we still talk about, the existence of developing countries or so-called third world countries, which I know there's a technical meaning for that, but then there's also colloquially just a word for developing countries. And before the Second Industrial Revolution, there wasn't nearly as big of a gap between the developed world and the developing world. And what we think of today is like, three worlds. Now, this goes back to the Cold War. The first world being the United States and Western Europe and Australia, Japan, South Korea, and other allied countries in the Cold War. And then the second world being the communist world. And then what you see here, in green, these are what they call third world countries, countries that are not necessarily aligned either way. But what you're seeing here is the projection of European power, which is somewhat inevitable when you see this gap in technology and that the population of Europe is so high at that time. So the new imperialism, okay, what is the new imperialism? What do we mean by this? All right, and note Japan, westernizing. One of these things is not like the others. You've got Britain, you've got Germany, Russia, France, and then Japan as well. Japan opened itself up to westernization, and at the turn of the 20th century, defeated Russia in the Russo-Japanese War, Japan becoming the first non-Western power, an ascendant non-Western power, defeating a declining Western power. And so the new imperialism was a period of colonial expansion by European powers, the United States and the Japanese Empire, between 1880 and 1914. So the turn of the 20th century. And so remember, Europe, the United States, and Japan. Now, not to be confused with colonial imperialism that followed the Age of Discovery in the 16th to the 18th century. Okay, so we want to make sure that we are able to, compare and contrast this, because there are some things that are in common, such as, if you think about missionary activity, that in both during the Age of Discovery and then the new imperialism, there are missionaries. Now, that's another thing, that one of the motivations for both, for both forms of imperialism is to protect missionaries. So, European countries wanted to protect investments. They wanted to also protect missionaries that were out there. And the best way to make sure that missionaries are protected is if we actually, these European countries take over, okay, that they actually administer the government. And so the British Empire was really the most successful of these empires. It was said that the sun never sets on the British Empire. Now, the scramble for Africa is something that is new here, okay, because during the Age of Exploration, you've got the slave trade going on in Africa, but at the same time, you don't really have, people going into the interior of Africa. And that is a big difference here, that Europeans start claiming Africa for themselves and really going into the interior. Now, the Belgian Congo is oftentimes cited as a, really kind of the worst example of, of this new imperialism. Now, some of these slides aren't finished, so just don't judge me if something looks, less than finished here. And so as far as that goes, think about the so-called civilizing mission. Okay. So when you think about the civilizing mission, this was a, kind of a moral justification for imperialism, that scientific racism was really the flavor of the day. It's like today, theories of racial superiority are something that Western society has rejected. But at at this time, the idea was that, Europeans and people of European descent were more developed, and they owed it to, this is the civilizing mission, which goes into the missionary activity, the schools that are open, some of the technology that's brought in, so there, a lot of these countries are thinking, we're actually doing something nice. But in the Belgian Congo, it was really, really especially nasty, where they're, hacking off limbs if they don't meet their rubber quota and stuff like that. Sir Cecil Rhodes, I've mentioned before, if you've been hanging out with me all week, that when we talk about a movement, we don't necessarily want to get everybody that's associated with a movement, but we want to remember, maybe 2 or 3 people, maybe in some cases, 1 person, if you're trying to make a 3 on this thing. And so Sir Cecil Rhodes was a British entrepreneur, mined diamonds, in South Africa, might have been a Minecraft fan today, and, has De Beers Corporation. Okay, so he's got this band of brothers that he traveled around Africa with, and Rhodesia, what was at that time called Rhodesia, was named for him. There's a dog today, a Rhodesian Ridgeback. My friends have one. And so another thing, now Cecil Rhodes has become controversial today because he's got, he pretty much subscribed to theories of racial superiority, and a lot of stuff like that, and really was a, big time, British nationalist. But at the same time, you might have heard of the Rhodes Scholarships. This is an example of philanthropy. This is something that Cecil Rhodes set up so that basically people from all of these other countries could go and study at Oxford, at his alma mater of Oxford. He had this dream, like a lot of these are from the United States. Bill Clinton was a Rhodes Scholar. And so there are lots of people who go and study in Britain. And what he was trying to do was to establish these ties with the English-speaking world. He thought that he could reunite the United States with Britain. And so this is a cartoon of the Rhodes Colossus. Okay, so you see here where, Britain, that's really kind of the British Empire is going from South Africa to Egypt. He had this idea, he wanted to build a railroad, just had all of these ideas for the projection of British power. Okay, and then, note that imperialism is also going on in India and China at that time. Now, Japan, of course, Japan opened themselves up and, they basically said, what, we need to westernize. You could, compare Japan with Peter the Great. All right. This is something as far as, he is trying, Japan is trying to westernize in order to preserve itself. Okay. So a few things here. I've mentioned the missionaries, the technology gap, national security. Now, also not only protecting investments like the Suez Canal, but also naval bases. And then this comes up a lot, the natural resources and expanding markets. I'd mentioned the rubber trade in the Belgian Congo. And so these natural resources and expanding markets for European goods, because with the second industrial revolution, there is a great increase, a massive increase in European manufacturing. So on one hand, they want the people in these colonies to buy European manufactured goods. And on the other side of this, there are exotic goods coming back from these countries for Europeans to buy. So there is a massive expansion of consumerism during this time. So you want to be able to connect consumerism and the expansion of markets to this. And remember, as I said, the civilizing mission, Rudyard Kipling's poem, The White Man's Burden, is an example of this, that there is this, this idea to elevate. Now, also, social Darwinism could come up. Now, there's, you've got about the same time. Now, I need these slides I'm not crazy about, and I don't want you to take these hook, line, and sinker, okay? But Charles Darwin, and he's writing about the same time as Herbert Spencer. Herbert Spencer actually was the first one to use the term survival of the fittest. And so Charles Darwin used that, at another time. So as far as scientific Darwinism, you've got Charles Darwin who says that, we've got this competition among species. And so social Darwinism is the idea that, we've also got competition among people. And, really with the, individuals and nations are competing for dominance. And, the fierce competition, social Darwinism, says that the fierce competition among, individuals and nations for dominance can actually be a very, a very good thing. Now, there are some other aspects of social Darwinism that would be great to discuss, but maybe aren't going to be on the exam. But on one hand, there's the civilizing mission. But then on the other hand, it's like, what? You've got the stronger, that are, dominating the weak. And, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because the strongest, the cream rises to the top, brings everybody else with it. That's what's going on here. Now, Sir Cecil Rhodes, the racial aspects of the new imperialism, saying that we English are the finest race in the world. The more of it we inhabit, the better for the human race. And as I mentioned, the triumph of the Japanese in the Russo-Japanese War. Another thing here is this is the first time that the United States has mediated a treaty, the Treaty of Portsmouth. Okay, so as far as that goes, ladies and gentlemen, let me go ahead and do that. But thank you very much, Bren, for your support, and all of your classmates over there in Somerville. Very, very glad to have y'all watching. And Josie, okay, so Bren and Josie in Somerville, thank y'all so much. All right. And so as far as that goes, let's see if anybody, okay, so Ava is feeling the dragon energy today. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, let's see if I've got any new Instagram follows to shout out. And let's see what else we got on Twitter. I might have to tend to my dog in a second. She is being kind of annoying here, but the thing is, now another thing, ladies and gentlemen, if I'm helping you, if this broadcast is helping you, I'm not charging anything for it, but on YouTube and at tomrichey.net/euro, I've got a little link if you want to buy me breakfast. It's a link to my PayPal. If you are being helped by this and you'd like to buy me breakfast, by all means, just click that link and buy me breakfast. Okay, up to you. I'm here for everybody, whether you buy me breakfast or not. Honestly, I had breakfast with my daughter a little while ago, so I'll be fine. But sometimes people ask, how can they support the broadcast? So I do have this link where you can buy me breakfast if you would like to do that. All right, if you find that this is helping you or your class or something like that. So let's see what's going on here. And Nicole, do I have any advice for test anxiety? Okay, which that's pretty basic. Don't get anxious. Let me tend to my dog here. Okay, Bonnie, you want to say hey to everybody? What's the deal? Okay, oh, you want to stay on the couch? All right. Bonnie, stop. All right. Can you get up there? All right. There you go. All right, she wanted to get on the couch. Okay, so test anxiety, easy. Just don't get anxious. Now, last night I was talking about Pascal's wager, okay, where Blaise Pascal in the scientific revolution, it's not enough to just have faith. You've got to have some kind of rational basis for it. So, I was talking about the Cartesian plane, where you have, if you are, you believe in God and God exists, then you're good. Now, if God doesn't exist, it doesn't matter. Okay. So, because you're just going to die anyway. But then if God exists and you don't believe, then you go to hell. So Blaise Pascal said, I might as well believe in God, because there's a payoff for believing in God, and there's not any kind of payoff for not believing in God. And so with that, it's like, if you have what it takes in your head to pass the exam and you approach it with confidence, then you're going to do better than if you don't approach it with confidence. Now, don't get sloppy and all that, but be confident in yourself. When you finish the multiple choice, if you have more time, don't go back and second guess yourself, okay? Because you're going to entertain doubt, and you could snatch defeat out of the jaws of victory. My daughter wanted to write my name in cursive on my hand. I know people are probably wondering what's he got on his hand. So yeah, it's just my name. My daughter, who's 8 years old in second grade, Want to show off recursive. So there you go. And so as far as that, that if you're confident, then, just be confident. And when you're going through the multiple choice, trust yourself. Test anxiety is largely rooted in fear of failure. Okay. And so if you don't have in your head what you need to pass, then you're not going to pass either way. Okay. So you might as well go in with full confidence, and at least you got to have a good time on the test. It's what's called, what George at the Webb School in Knoxville calls the Dunning-Kruger effect. I didn't know about this, but this is that effect where, when that person that doesn't know anything, and they come out of the test and they're like, whoa, that was easy. But they really just don't know how hard it is because they knew so little that it seemed easy to them. Well, the thing is, at least that person didn't have test anxiety. And so when it comes down to it, test anxiety can hurt you, but it can do nothing to help you. And so, it's just rooted in fear of failure. I would suggest maybe a little bit of meditation before you go into the test, and just really just sit there, put everything away, and for even like 3 to 5 minutes, just compose yourself and just think about that. I have nothing to gain by being anxious. I have nothing to gain by doubting myself. I could only lose something by that, and I could run out of time because I'm not trusting myself. So that's my advice for test anxiety, is just consider it rationally, in the spirit of the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, that you don't have anything to gain from test anxiety. You're going in there, there's really nothing you can do about it. If you can't write, if you're like, hey, the LEQ topics aren't that great. Well, it's just do what you can. It's easy to score at least a couple points. And then remember for the DBQ that if you know how to write a DBQ, it doesn't matter what the topic is. Okay. So that's one thing to note, that if you're like, oh my goodness, this DBQ, don't do that. Okay. Just, what, this DBQ topic seems pretty obscure. That's another thing to note, that if the LEQ topics look bad or the DBQ topic looks bad, then remember that it probably looks bad to other people as well. And so, go in there and do the best you can, because if it's bizarre, then everybody's going to have, a similar experience as you. And so sometimes you might think you're the only one that's afraid. And, it's really, if you think about it, David and Goliath, if we're thinking about Michelangelo's David, in sculpted in this Greek, in this Greco-Roman style, contrapposta stance. And David is looking at a giant, and he's staring down that giant, and he's doing so very, very rationally. That is the way that you need to approach this exam, that you are staring at the giant, but you've got some big rocks. Okay. You've got some big rocks. You've got a sling. Go in there and defeat it. Okay. So think about this. I would focus on Michelangelo's David when you find yourself, getting anxious or scared, and think about this, that, if David can face up to Goliath, if he could manage not to be afraid, then so can you. And there is a great chance of you being successful, and fear does nothing for you. So that is my best advice for test anxiety. Thank you, Ben Schaefer, Roses and Thorns. Let's see. Amar, thank y'all so much. Amar, that's an interesting little sign you're making there on your Instagram. And Chicken Tender Love, yeah, it's not even your real name. Shout out. Okay, so as far as that, D Davis 97, Brittany with a 3 there. Okay, so we've got that going on here. Shout out to Mr. Oreskovich. All right, so we've got a shout out there. Chicken Tender Love, you can stop now. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, you know what? Let me post this meme on Instagram from Mr. Now they're probably all asleep, but Mr. Let's see. All right, we've got this Mr. Oliver's class in Fresno, California. Okay, Mr. Oliver's class in Fresno, California. I'm about to put a meme on my Instagram. Now, remember, check my Instagram story for our little gag, and that's going to be pretty awesome there. Okay, so let me actually, I need to edit this real quick, and then I'm going to get this meme posted, and we're going to get back to the next question. All right, so let's go. Hey, this is just so funny. He makes like the craziest memes that I've ever seen. And just a little bit of encouragement, dab on the test tomorrow. You know, let's go ahead and do that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Oliver. Let's see. Oliver, okay, there we go. All right, so AP Euro. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, okay, so we've got that, and we've got that posted. Give that meme some love. Mr. Oliver makes such great memes. Okay, so what a dank memer. His teachers are very lucky. All right. And so as far as that goes, you know, Hannah, there is, if you go to my online store on my website, we did a 2-hour review. If you're on the West Coast or something like that, we did an art review, you know, but then again, you know, yeah, so we did that. So I'm not really going to be focusing on art so much, you know, on this one, because we did that premium art review last night. But I am going to go over some notes I have about women in European history. So we want to make sure that we go over that. Okay. So as far as this goes, let's see. So we'll go ahead and go and see what kind of questions we've got here on Twitter. All right. Okay, 294. Okay, Miss Kelly's class is watching. Thank you so much. Y'all just want shout outs. Y'all don't want review. Y'all just want shout outs. Miss Nadaske's AP Euro class. Okay, hopefully I pronounced that right, but it is a written test, right? The partitions of Poland. Okay, Miss White's class. Okay, and it looks like Mr. Gary's AP Euro class is having a nice time there, decorating their board and putting stuff on me. I'm going to retweet that. But let's go ahead and take a quick look at the partitions of Poland. Okay, so. All right. So let me go ahead and just show you that. Now, this is during the age of absolutism. Okay. So Poland, you know, which a lot, if there are any Poland memers out there, just a shout out to them. So the partitions of Poland. What we have here, ladies and gentlemen, is there is Poland in 1772. Now, Poland was still a constitutional state where the nobles, you know, they're really still following this kind of feudalistic model where the nobles, you know, had very generous veto powers over the monarch, and they're surrounded by these countries that are becoming absolutist. And when you think, you know, people ask, why is it that Prussia Brandenburg became an absolutist state? Why is it that they allowed Frederick the Great Elector to tax by decree? Well, they didn't want to become Poland. Okay, so the thing is, the biggest incentive to adopt an absolutist you know, structure was to preserve your country, because what happened here is there were 3 partitions in the late 18th century. Russia, Prussia, and Austria all agreed. Now, Austria didn't participate in the second partition, but over a period of 23 years, Poland was, you know, partitioned during this time. Now, remember also during World War II, you've got the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, or, you know, the Soviet, you know, Nazi non-aggression pact. And so Poland, you know, is taken over here, then makes an appearance after World War I because of Woodrow Wilson's 14 points and self-determination of peoples. And then it is taken over again during World War II, and then is revived again as a state, which after World War II, but remember, in the Eastern Bloc, this Soviet sphere of influence. Okay, so the Warsaw Pact being this, you know, this defense pact that was counteracting NATO during the Cold War. Okay, let me check something out real quick. This one is from work. Let's see. Let me go ahead. And this is from work, so I'm just having to send that. Okay. All right, let's see. So we've got that. All right, got to make sure to take care of work first. Appreciate my administration letting me do this broadcast. All right, so as far as that goes, the Eastern Bloc, you know, that Stalin said that, look, Germany has, you know, has gone east and invaded Russia, or now the Soviet Union at this time, twice, and Stalin demanded a sphere of influence that included these Eastern Bloc countries, going beyond the countries that were part of the Soviet Union, where you have, you know, Poland, you know, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria, and it looks like Albania. Remember, Yugoslavia went, they stayed communist, but they went independent. Okay. And so as far as that goes, you know, Poland, you know, is back. And then, of course, then, you know, you've got the solidarity movement in Poland, kind of the revival of Catholicism there. There was a DBQ a few years ago that some of you might have done on that. So remember, during the Cold War, the Eastern Bloc, and then over here, you've got NATO, these countries that are allied, you know, this alliance between Western and Mediterranean Europe and the United States and Canada, where you have these mutual defense backpacks during the Cold War. Now, also remember the Marshall Plan, or the European Recovery Plan, which came after World War II. One of the things about the Cold War era is the United States is showing up and enthusiastic for the first time about intervening in Europe to try to stop you know, the spread of communism. And my friends at Arkansas High School, it was getting a little bit hot for that hoodie. I thank my friends Braintree Cross Country. Thank y'all so much for that. Okay, so let's see what we've got going on here. All right, so let's go back to Twitter and see what we've got coming in. All right. Shout out to Mr. Bentley's class in Troy, New York, Pope Squad. Okay. And a shout out to Pope Squad in Virginia Beach if they're watching. And Mrs. Orr's class from AMHS, over 60 kids packed into one classroom. Okay. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, that my app partners would love me to shout out the Romulus Euro app. If you're looking for some last minute studying, $2.99 at the App Store and Google Play, Romulus Euro. All right. So as far as that, Miss Castine, one of my big supporters in Raleigh, North Carolina. Let's see. So as far as that goes, now, I don't know how much I have to say necessarily about, you know, during the 1648 to 1815 period. But one thing that that tends to show up, let me go ahead and talk briefly about the Dreyfus affair. Okay. And this is an unfinished presentation, you know, so don't judge me if some of the slides are a little bit off, but it's something I plan to do eventually here. Okay. So let me go ahead and project my screen here again, and we will go from there. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, all right. Okay, and a quick app plug, Romulus Euro, ladies and gentlemen, there it is. There's also a free version on, you know, the App Store if you want to just check it out. Limited number of questions. All right, so let's go and look at the Dreyfus affair. Okay, so the Dreyfus affair was at the turn of the 20th century, and it was an incident in France. Now, of course, remember that in 1492, you know, Ferdinand and Isabella expelled the Muslims and the Jews from Spain. Then in the Middle Ages, there would be Jewish communities that were in European towns and cities, and you know, they would oftentimes, because usury, the lending of money at rates of interest that justified lending, the church really frowned upon that. So you know, you would have you know, Jews that would lend money. Now, of course, during the Black Death, Jews were scapegoated for poisoning the wells, which was very convenient, not just from a standpoint of persecuting a religious minority, but also getting rid of debts. Okay, getting rid of debts that were owed. So Alfred Dreyfus. Now, here's the thing, that in the late 19th century, you know, we start to see that Jews are starting to assimilate into European society. And, you know, during the Middle Ages, they had distinctive clothing and they lived in their own communities. So now, you know, as we see more religious toleration, Jews are trying to assimilate. And Alfred Dreyfus was a French military officer of Jewish descent. Now, we see here at this time Impressionist art, you know, which which was very prevalent at this time. And then we see, you know, sometimes like Degas, who was an anti-Dreyfusard. We see this impressionist painting where the nose is very accentuated here. And some people have said that this is, you know, a reflection of his anti-Semitism. Now, I said this is, you know, a work in progress. So in 1894, Dreyfus was court-martialed and found guilty for treason. Now, with very limited evidence, you know, it was actually not him that had shared these secrets, but there is Dreyfus having his sword broken, and he's sent to Devil's Island, which is not a very good place to be. I suppose that's why they're calling it that. And then we want to associate Emile Zola. Okay, so he wrote this, j'accuse, which is I accuse. Okay, so you had this division between Dreyfusards and anti-Dreyfusards, people who were in favor of Dreyfus, who advocated for Dreyfus, and protested the treatment of Jews, this unjust treatment of Jews. And so that's what Zola is doing. Okay, so we want to remember Emile Zola and j'accuse. I've seen that come up on exams before. It could be on this exam. Now remember, everything's not going to be on this exam because of the nature of the exam and the stimulus-based questions. It's not going to be completely comprehensive. There are going to be things that you studied that aren't on there. But remember, again, that happens to everybody. Everybody's in the same boat. And, you know, hopefully you studied some of the right things. And, you know, I know your teachers have been great to you and gotten you ready. Now, the thing is, the Dreyfus affair is often seen as a, you know, kind of causal influence, or at least it's not like it created Zionism, but it gave steam to Zionism. Okay, so this is Theodor Herzl, who was the father of Zionism, this idea of a Jewish state, okay, the idea of a Jewish state. And so, you know, Herzl said that the Jewish question persists wherever Jews live in appreciable numbers. Wherever it does not exist, it is brought together with Jewish immigrants. We are naturally drawn into those places where we are not persecuted, and our appearance there gives rise to persecution. So anytime they see a place that's liberalizing and open to Jews, Jews flock there, and then they are persecuted once they get there, because then people are saying, oh, you know, we've got an increase, you know, in Jews. We've got to do something about this. And he said here, this is the case, and it inevitably will be so everywhere, even in highly civilized countries. Now, remember, he's writing in British English here. See, for instance, France, so long as the Jewish question is not solved on the political level. Now, the thing is, though, Patty, Miss Lawrence and her class, this is, you know, actually, yes, okay, so all right. Oh, good, good, good. And Miss Lawrence is actually watching, and I'm going to tell Miss Lawrence he was actually writing in German. That's an inside joke for those of you who are watching the premium hangout last night. So Theodor Herzl was not originally writing in English. He is writing in German. Now, one thing that you know, that Patty encouraged me to do here is that remember that this is what's called an open letter. Okay, so when we're thinking about source material, you know, this is an open letter, which is different than a private letter. So, you know, his audience here, even though it is a letter, an open letter is a letter that's addressed to someone. So he's addressing it to the President of the Republic of France, but the intended audience is not, you know, the President of France. The intended audience is the public of France. So, you know, a private letter you're writing to this person, depending on who it is, you may be prone to be more candid. And, you know, with that, you know, you've got, you know, with this, though, this is something where he has an agenda. He wants to speak directly to the French public as a whole. And thank you to the teachers who were reminding me about things and making suggestions. Those of you who teach that, you know, are able to text me that I've been in touch with. Thank y'all so much for offering some feedback. And Miss Delbert's class in New Orleans. Yes, she knows her girls are listening. And Yes, it is a consuming time for me. Thank you so much, Miss Delbert, if you're watching, and all the girls there, Miss Delbert students in New Orleans. So I'm very certainly very glad about that. All right, so yes, Mount Carmel Academy. All right, so shout out to Mount Carmel Academy AP Euro. All right, so the thing is that Zionism is coming across here like that. Herzl is arguing for a Jewish homeland, der Judenstaat. Okay, so the Jewish state, and that's what we see today in Israel. Now, of course, after World War I, we don't necessarily have after World War I a Jewish state, but you do see the Balfour Declaration, which says that Britain supports the idea of a Jewish state, possibly in Palestine. And so Zionism comes out of that. Now, one thing to note is 100 years ago, 90% of the world's Jews lived in Europe, which today, 90% of the world's Jews either live in the United States or in Israel. And so very few Jews left in Europe, with most Jews being in these two countries. And of course, for those of you who follow international affairs today, you can see, the consequences of that. Israel has been in the news this week, for things going on over there. Let's see. Let me just send a quick message to Miss Delbert there. Okay, so thank y'all for supporting my work there, Mount Carmel Academy. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, let's see what our next topic is as far as that goes. And thank you to those of you on Instagram that are liking Mr. Oliver's meme, because he is one of my favorite memers and a great AP Euro teacher. Yes, a beautiful work of art. Mr. Molden's class is watching, okay? Now, the thing is, I've never been an SAQ reader, so I've got better advice for the DBQs and the LEQs, but I have spoken to SAQ readers, okay? And what SAQ readers tend to point out, some people talk about, at first when the SAQs came out, a lot of us were like, let's come up with a format that will work every time. Now, the SAQs, there's not always going to be one format that will work, but what you need to remember is typically the answer requires a piece of evidence. And that's the same thing in your contextualization. When you start your DBQ or LEQ, the best place to put contextualization is the beginning. It's not required at the beginning, but your reader is expecting that. So the thing is, if you want good luck from Kanye, write Dragon Energy, cross it out, and then get started with your contextualization. And your contextualization really needs to be something that, the contextualization needs to have some details there. And one of my students who's really good at contextualization, he said, I just picked one thing and rambled about it. One thing that he thought, remember, the immediate background, it needs to have some relevance and to be in the immediate background, but then focus on one thing. Don't try to jump all over the place. And so the other thing with, the SAQs, for example, okay, when we're thinking about the SAQs, that, the people that, get them wrong don't necessarily, it's not because they didn't follow a format, it's more because they didn't answer the question. So answer the question, make sure that you are providing an illustrative, specific example, okay, because that's what they're tending to look for, okay? They're looking for they're looking for an example there. Okay, so make sure that you are specific in how you do that. Now, remember also that the parts of the SAQ, there will be an A, B, and C. Those are graded separately. So if you want to answer A and B and you're not so sure about C, leave that there, go to something and then you can go back. Now, the multiple choice, I think it's very important that you have a clean answer sheet and you go through those one at a time. You eliminate the answers that are clearly incorrect. You choose from the answers remaining, and then you go on, and don't second guess yourself on that. Because the thing is that a lot of test anxiety is grounded in is grounded in the fear of like getting something wrong and like I'm going to fail if I get something wrong. And so the thing is, I love Albert IO. They make a great product. And one of the great free products they've got is the AP European History score calculator. And so when you go here, it's like, to get a 3, you're looking at maybe getting, if you can get 28 to 30, if you get the, half of them correct, let's go to about half of the SAQs. Okay. And let's see what's going on there. So we've got, a 2, a 1, and a 1. So scoring 4 out of 9 points on the SAQ. Now let's think about 3 out of 7 for the DBQ. 2. Okay. Now we can't do that. Okay. If we want to get a 2 out of 6, we need to do a little bit better on the SAQ. Maybe you're a little bit better than that at the multiple choice. So let's think about this, that you could miss 20 questions out of 55 and you can still pass this exam. So it's not going to be, it's not going to help you to obsess over every question. So remember that you can miss 20 of them. You could miss 25 of them if you're a good writer, and it's still okay. And you see here that the SAQs, now there may be some, like sometimes, I've looked at one before and I teach this class where I've just been, oh my goodness, I have no idea what that, that first one is always going to have secondary sources, and those can be a little bit tough. Okay. Sometimes I look at it and I'm like, what in the devil? Like, what is going on there? And so, you're not necessarily going to score all of the points here, but if you're good, if you have a strong multiple choice, you're really looking at, now there's really no reason if you know the rubric not to do any less than a 4 on the DBQ, but let's think about a 3 and a 2. And so when it comes down to it, you can pass this exam and you can still miss a lot of points. So don't let the exam intimidate you. Don't think in terms of like you've got to get 100 or something like that. Now with that, let's think about what we can do here, that we can think about, 40 out of 55, doing well on getting the majority of points there on the SAQs. And let's think about like a 4 and a 3, then you've got a 4 on the exam. Okay. And of course, if you're on your way to making a 5, you don't need a score calculator. You're just awesome as it is. And, which all of you are awesome here. And thank y'all so much for watching. But I'm going to tweet a link to the Albert IO score calculator. Okay. So, yes, thank you so much. We've got, Miss Garcia's class. Thank you so much, Laura and her friends watching with Miss Garcia's class. Got y'all a thing here. Now, let's start sharing some memes. If you've got a class together, share your best AP Euro meme with me, okay? So I want to see some memes on Twitter. Remember to start off with your Dragon Energy hashtag. I'd love to see some memes. And the award for best score calculator goes to Learn with Albert. Now, ladies and gentlemen, like especially teachers, Albert is a great product. They've got pilot programs. I'm really a big fan of that product. And the thing is, I don't get paid anything to promote their product. All I do is I just ask that they let my students use it. And that's really something to say here that I believe in that product. I was like, this is an awesome product. I mean, if my students could just use it, then awesome. And so the thing is, like the point of view there, it's like, I'm not making anything. There's no way to connect it to me if you go and ask them about their product. But the thing is, I just think it's a great product. The analytics are amazing. If you're a teacher, now individual students can get it as well. So they do all kinds of AP exams, not just this one. So something to keep in mind for next year. But I just tweeted a link to that score calculator. All right. And great. Martin Luther, the OG trick-or-treater. That's a great meme there. Okay. And let's see what we can find here. Oh, my Lord. Okay. Lizard in Pittsburgh. Yeah, that's so funny here. That Henry the Eighth and Henriette or wait, no, Henry, and then Hen Yeet. All right, so that is really, really funny there. Hen Yeet the 8. Oh gosh, the memers are just cracking me up. Let's see if I can find an actually, an actual question and see if we can go on there. Thank y'all, y'all on Instagram showing love to, to the memes here. And so we've got Aiden Wells. Thank you so much for the follow, Aiden. We've also got Isabella, Elise, and Elizabeth Cerna. All right. Thank you, Elizabeth, for the follow. Philippians 4:13. I believe you can do all things through Christ. Hopefully Jesus helps you on that exam, even though Voltaire, a deist, would say that that's very unlikely, correct? And Sophia, wow, these memes are, oh my goodness, Belle, I made this meme, okay? This was actually an original meme, like I made this, okay? I didn't put my watermark on that one, but I made this a year ago. Belle, I'm so glad to see that that meme is still circulating there, that's one that I made. All right, so as far as that, that's so funny. Oh, whoa, yeah, Mr. Slim's class is ready. He's dressed up like Napoleon. Miss White's class, okay, I'm not trying to avoid answering questions. I'm just not seeing anything. All right. Now, as far as that goes, oh, wow, my friend Ethan PayPal'd me, okay? Remember, y'all have the option to buy me breakfast if y'all would like, okay? So it's just, if you feel like this is helping you, just thought I'd put the option out there to buy me breakfast. Now, Ethan, what I'm going to tell you here, and this is just as important as anything if I were to directly answer your question, it's valuable to know that the 100 Years' War concluded before the exam, okay? So typically, like we'll start off in a class teaching the late Middle Ages to provide context. So these things are useful, but the 100 Years' War is not going, you're not going to see something on the 100 Years' War actually on the exam because it concluded before 1450. So that's something that now, of course, you do have as a consequence of that, some emerging nationalism. Nationalism is something that really comes to maturity in the late 18th and the 19th centuries. And of course, World War I, that's certainly a factor there. But one of the legacies of the 100 Years' War is that the English nobility starts speaking English. Imagine that, because before this, the English nobility spoke French, okay? The English nobility spoke French, and it's like, we're fighting French, we need to be English. And also, the decline of feudalism, the decline of the mounted knight as the most valuable battlefield unit. So during this time, the English especially are using foot soldiers. So when we look at, a rise of, national power in comparison to the Middle Ages, and then of course the decline of the, of the mounted knight there. And so thank you, Miss Wetmore in Virginia Beach. I tell you what, Mr. Goots' class, Miss Wetmore's class, Miss Lawrence's class, Miss Davis's class. Oh my goodness, Miss Davis's class. Y'all know why I'm laughing. Okay, I mean, your teacher is a riot. But that entire community, and the artist known on Facebook as Consuela Diego, which I can't remember like two names there. But yes, thank y'all so much. Miss Law's class, that's also in Virginia Beach. If y'all are watching, shout out to y'all. And I probably forgot somebody in Virginia Beach, but y'all know that I love you. I'm just short on sleep. Now, Maya, here's the thing. Maya's asked me about the most important kings and queens to remember. Now, as far as that goes, one thing that I would note is you're really taking the wrong approach if you're just like, okay, who are the most important kings and queens? What you need to think about is a lot of the stuff on this exam is about associations. And so when you think about this, not just the most important kings and queens in European history, that's a very like archaic, way to study, but really saying, who are the most important absolutist monarchs? Okay, so when I think about something like that, and I want a couple of illustrative examples of absolutism, so I would then go to Louis XIV and possibly go into how he made the nobles attend to him at Versailles, and as a result, you saw a decline in noble power. And so that's something that we would relate to absolutism. You see, as far as the Fredericks creating this militaristic state, because military militarism is a key component of absolutism. Peter the Great and his westernization policies. Now remember that Russia was always an autocracy. It was already an autocracy, and it would remain an autocracy until the 20th century and what's called the 1905 revolution. So when we're talking about the Russian Revolution, make sure that you know the origins of that, that Russia in the 19th century was very, very behind, because Peter the Great was like, okay, let's westernize. And then Catherine the Great was like, let's give some money and attention to the philosophes of the Enlightenment, but let's not really do anything to reform the state, because I owe my position to the nobility for being complicit in the possible assassination of my ex-husband. And so things like that Russia in the 19th century, by the mid 19th century, they're really not, you don't have these liberal institutions that are showing up in other places. In the revolutions of 1848, there's not even a revolutionary attempt in Russia because of the repression of the Decembrist revolt, that people knew, I don't even want to try here. And so Alexander II made some efforts to liberalize in Russia. Now, liberalization from above. So, you've got, he abolished serfdom. He set up these zemstvos, which were local units of government. And he was allegedly working on a constitution, that he wanted there to be a representative body, at least something that would be advisory. But, he wanted to introduce liberalism from above, really maybe not too far from the idea of like enlightened absolutism, but he's trying to liberalize. This is also the time when you've got the Trans-Siberian Railroad being built in Russia. But Alexander II, which somebody, shared a meme yesterday that I retweeted. The nobles didn't kill Alexander II. It was these radical anarchist, socialist terrorists who didn't want liberalization. Okay, so these radicals, they didn't want liberalization, because what happens when things liberalize is it kills these socialist working class movements that are trying to overthrow the government. Think about what Bismarck did in Germany, what we call state socialism. That Bismarck, in order to try to reduce the influence of the German Social Democratic Party, which today is a center-left party, but at the time was a democratic socialist party. And so what's going on there is Bismarck decides, first he tries banning the Social Democratic Party, and that didn't work out so well. And so Bismarck's like, let's have old age pensions, accident insurance, and health insurance. And this really, just guts the influence of the Social Democratic Party, because a lot of the things some of the things they were asking for, Bismarck's like, what, I'm going to do that from above. And so the thing is that there was concern among these anarchists. They're thinking like, I want to we want to overthrow the government, and all of this liberalizing is going to make people it's the other direction. The radicals don't want liberalization. And so when Alexander II was assassinated, his son Alexander III was very repressive. Okay, so he was very repressive, and of course you can't blame him there. But all of these liberalizing efforts by Alexander II, they were stopped in their tracks. And then of course you've got Nicholas II, who came in a very in a very tough spot. Okay, that basically Nicholas II, of course, there is the loss in the Russo-Japanese War in 1905. So what happens in 1905 is you've got the 1905 revolution, and that is where for the first time Russia has a constitutional monarchy in the 20th century. And so now they've got a state Duma. They've got this representative body. And then in 1917, of course, Russia is being rocked in World War I, and this is bringing the Russian state to the breaking point. And so then then enter Lenin, who the Germans kind of smuggled in to cause trouble. And now the thing is, there are two revolutions in 1917. There is the February Revolution. Now, of course, there's some old calendar, new calendar stuff going on here, but there's the February Revolution, and then there's the October Revolution. So the February Revolution is where they said, you know, hey, Nicholas, you've got to abdicate. Like, we've got to basically become a sort of republic, a democratic republic kind of thing. You know, we've got to get rid of the monarchy because you're too unpopular. So he abdicates. And then in October, November, but the Russians call it October. You know, Tom Clancy had that book, The Hunt for Red October. So this October Revolution is when the Bolsheviks take advantage of this very unstable system here. So on one hand, when you look back at the revolutions of 1848, those failed because the conservatives were united, and all of these liberals and nationalists and socialists and radical Democrats, they couldn't really come up with a program, and the conservatives struck back. Now, what you're dealing with the provisional government that took over in February was that they never really could get their act together. And, you know, whereas Lenin was much more organized. Now, this is where Lenin has his revolutionary vanguard, as he calls it. Now, remember that what Lenin did was not strict Marxism, because strict Marxism said that the working class is going to rise up on its own. And Lenin, you know, in a violent revolution. Now, this goes two ways. No, you know, it's never happened as Marx said it would happen. But on one hand, you had Fabian socialism or democratic socialism, these social democratic parties that are deciding, you know what, let's use the democratic process, to do this. Let's use the democratic process and use that to implement what Marx wanted. So make socialist reforms using the apparatus of government. So you get rid of the revolutionary aspect. This is what would be called evolutionary socialism. And then you've got Lenin, who says that we're going to have a violent revolution, but you need a revolutionary vanguard. You've got to have these people who basically they go and they tell the proletariat, this is what it is that you need to do. They make them aware of their, they need somebody to give them class consciousness. Lenin says they don't come up with this on their own. And so as far as that goes, that's the essence, just the very short version of the Russian Revolution, which is something I plan to put into a video at some point. That doesn't help y'all a whole lot, but a lot of people are always asking about the Russian Revolution. All right, so as far as that goes, so while I'm on, let's see what happened here, Jake. Let's see. To watch what's your classmate watching? I don't know what. Okay, yeah, so I'm on, and the classmate here is watching something. I guess she's just ready to make a 5. She's like, Kanye's got my back, but I don't know, she doesn't look like she's feeling the dragon energy. Does she, Jake? So interesting there, but we'll see. But we don't, we definitely want her to be comfortable. Harold L. Richard, so Richards, Miss Cruz, very good here. Feeling that dragon energy. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, oh my goodness, that is quite a violent meme there. All right, so then we've got the Britain and German ball meme there. Interesting. All right, so the dominant families here. Okay, now the thing is, Nara, we're looking at some things that maybe get into minutia, but one thing you want to know is one of the consequences of the French Wars of Religion. The French Wars of Religion is the turnover from the Valois dynasty, or since you're taking a written test, the Valois dynasty, Valois, and that yields to the Bourbon dynasty. And there's, Henry IV who comes in, Henry of Navarre. And remember, he was a politique. Now, a politique, this is somebody who he believes in political concerns over religious concerns. So Henry converts to Catholicism. He says Paris is worth a mass, and then he issues the Edict of Nantes to try to, basically give partial toleration of Huguenot Calvinist Protestantism. Now, remember that after that, of course, you've got the Counter-Reformation, and there is a resurgence of Catholicism on the continent. Now, of course, that is, not going, taking place in Britain. Britain or in the upper Netherlands, but in a lot of places in continental Europe, not so much Northern Europe, Scandinavia, but in most of Europe, you've got this resurgence of Catholicism. So Louis the 14th, 2 generations later, he was not a politique like his grandfather. He was a very devout Catholic. And so he rescinded the Edict of Nantes, but he was coming from a position of strength. Remember, absolutism is not about religious toleration, and religious toleration is not what people generally wanted in France at that time. This is before the Enlightenment. And remember, even during the Enlightenment, you really just had like some people among the elites who were favoring toleration. Even today, the world is full of intolerant people, who don't like when people disagree with them. Yes, we've got a shout out to Kanye. Allison says that Kanye wants me to give a shout out to her class there, a champion gymnast. How about that? And a shout out to Mr. Elliott's class. Thank you, Fictional Wanderer, for the Instagram follow. Mr. Levin's AP Euro class from Wisconsin, Ted B123, Taylor Ribble. Then we've got Aiden Wells. Aiden, I've seen you before. Aiden, are you like refollowing me to try to get like shout outs again? Because I swear you were already following me. But you know what? Machiavelli would say the end justifies the means. If you're trying to get a shout out, that worked. All right. So Too Lit Tulip. Y'all got some of the funniest things. And Lil Lee. Very good. Lil Lee or Little Leah, whatever we go by there. And, thank you for participating here. That is a really cool little thing you got there in New Orleans. Ben Ye done that. Ha, 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 ha. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead. We're moving into the second hour of the broadcast. Let's talk about women. Okay. So let me go over some things here that I think are very important for, understanding women for the AP European History exam. Make sure that we're able to respect women on this thing if we've got some questions. Okay, now first of all, we want to note here in pre-industrial Europe, okay, that you don't really have. Now, one thing that I would try to avoid, if you have to write an SAQ, a DBQ, an LEQ on women, that don't use the words cooking and cleaning. Okay, so when we look at pre-industrial societies, ladies and gentlemen. Pre-industrial societies, you don't have the separate spheres between men's work and women's work. We see here this Bruegel painting of the harvesters in 1565. And in this painting, we have, men and women out there working. Now, they may do different things, okay? So you see that, men are doing the reaping out here, which is more, which is heavier labor. And you see that the women are baling all of this wheat together. But then everybody is having lunch together. Men and women are out there working in the fields. It's not like the woman is just inside the farmhouse cooking and cleaning. So in pre-industrial societies, there was, you don't see these separate spheres in agricultural labor. Everybody is out there doing the same thing. Now, also remember, before the Industrial Revolution, there was more of an emphasis on, in the agricultural revolution, even, there was more of an emphasis on leisure time. Okay. So, this leisure time that people value very much. And so when you look at the harvesters, you see a lot of things there. Now, I've got this painting in my British Agricultural Revolution lecture because what we see later is the enclosure movement. Okay. So now note how everybody's out here working in this big field. When we see the enclosure movement, it becomes much more on agriculture as a business and private property and that sort of thing. Okay. Now, the Renaissance, one thing that I think is very, very important to think about when you're thinking about the Renaissance is that the Renaissance was sexist. Okay. There's this really amazing article that you can find online. Was there a Renaissance for women? A mind-blowing read. I was like, wow. Okay. Because really, she was talking about, how the mounted knight's code of chivalry. It was about basically, serving the woman, that you were there and you were in some ways, swearing vassalage to her. And so this code of chivalry starts to give way to this Renaissance way of life, which, Castiglione, or since we've got a written test coming up, Castiglione in the Book of the Courtier. Now, remember, Machiavelli and Castiglione, they are these civic humanist writers of the Italian Renaissance. Civic humanism, specifically the application of humanist studies, of classical studies, Greek, Roman, and biblical, to politics. And so Machiavelli, when he writes The Prince, he's writing about how to be an effective ruler. Now, not necessarily how to be a good Christian ruler. This is that this is from a secular perspective and really about being effective. And so the ends justify the means. Do whatever you think that you need to do in order to, in order to project your power. Now, remember, Machiavelli is coming from his studies of the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire. And so he says, this is how to be an effective ruler. Now, Castiglione, or in writing, Castiglione, he is writing in the Book of the Courtier how to be an effective advisor to a ruler. And so in the book of the Courtier, sometimes just called the Courtier, this is a courtesy book. This is how to be a gentleman. Now, the thing is, when we think about a gentleman, this is not a fierce, mounted knight, who's like, look, my, thing is I fight and I'm a big warrior and all that. And I've got this woman that I'm sweet on, and this tradition of courtly love where, he is swearing this oath to her. And honoring her. But really, this is about men have to calm themselves down a bit. Now, they should still be good at fighting, but they also need to be able to write passable poetry. Now, remember, when we're writing poetry to women during the Renaissance, it's in the vernacular, because women were not taught to read the classical languages. Aristocratic women would be taught, taught to read in the vernacular, but, they're also being taught to sing and to sew and to do these things that are more ladylike. So as you see the Renaissance man, where this man has to, calm himself down and become a gentleman, there's this thing that like, hey, women should have to do a similar thing. So you've got this idea of what a lady is and proper ladylike behavior. And so as far as that goes, we've got that. And, so Castiglione writes basically that a woman, like if she is present when men are talking and it gets to be some kind of inappropriate topic that's not really appropriate for a woman to be talking about, she doesn't need to correct them because that's seen as overly prudish. She doesn't need to walk out because that would be seen again as prudish. She doesn't need to enter into the conversation because that's unladylike. We've seen things, of course, in the, even in the 2016 election, there's still applications of this double standard where, it's in some circles acceptable for men to talk a certain way, than, other than women. And if women talk this way, it's seen as unladylike. This really goes back to the Renaissance and their glorification of classical republicanism. So make sure as far as that goes that they're looking back and they're looking at this, at the ideal woman being like Lucretia in, when you're reading Livy, that this woman who was, running the house and that sort of thing. So we see this separate sphere for women, and that the men are the ones who are going to, a woman should basically be silent in the public sphere, whether it's men talking inappropriately or men talking about things of substance. So we start to see that, and when you think about Renaissance writers, Renaissance artists, they're all men because women are not taught these things. They're not given the requisite education or training. So remember, the Renaissance was sexist humanism. Now, also there is, if you think about like Shakespearean plays, The Taming of the Shrew is another illustrative example that a shrew or a shrewish woman, this is something that You know, she is a woman who really doesn't know her place and doesn't know how to act like a woman. The movie 10 Things I Hate About You, which is something some of y'all might have seen. That's a classic that came out, you know, when I was in high school and college. It's based on this, that like, you know, this, and people argue about whether, you know, Shakespeare was meaning to validate or challenge traditional roles, but this idea of this shrewish woman, you know, is something that during the Renaissance is seen as no, a woman should be ladylike and silent and all of that kind of stuff. Mr. Molden's class asking me these things. If I could be any European monarch, who would I be and why? Okay, as if that should be a question, ladies and gentlemen. Funny story here, because a couple years ago, I got this in the mail. Like, I mean, I got this awesome, like, equestrian statue of Peter the Great, which is a replica of the one that's in St. Petersburg. Remember that Peter was about westernization and warm water ports. If anybody wants to get a screenshot of this and meme it, I would be interested to see what you come up with there. You know, we've got Peter the Great, you know, who wanted to westernize at his warm water ports and was, you know, just a great absolute monarch who also liked to go to the Netherlands. I've got a video where I went to the Tsar Peter house, which was a house that a little cabin that he stayed in for a week in Zaandam, in the Netherlands. And so, you know, that's something that, you know, Peter the Great, I've got music videos. I mean, I've probably got four, if you put in Tom Richey, Peter the Great, all kinds of stuff. But yeah, Peter the Great is my favorite monarch there. And so, yes, from Andrew in Kenosha. Okay. Oh, got it. Okay. Which Andrew's got a meme in Kenosha, one of Miss Fee's students, you know, where remember 18th century warfare and balance of power warfare, you know, basically France getting involved in the American Revolution, not out of any sympathy for the American Revolution, but just to spite the British. And so that's something, that's a great meme. It says, USA, France, help me. France, can't, I'm broke. USA, it's against the British, and then all of a sudden there's France. But you know, so that great meme there. Wisconsin memes are my favorite. Prove me wrong, okay? If I say Wisconsin memes are the best, change. Oh yeah, that's it. Isn't change my mind? That's the meme, right? So it's like, you know, Wisconsin memes are the best. Change my mind. By the way, mug conspiracy theorist, there's nothing in this. There was something in it last night, but there's nothing in it right now. Van Gogh, post-impressionist. I got this at the Van Gogh Museum in the Netherlands. And so thank you so much. And lots of dragon energy at Madison Southern. Okay, so these kids volunteered to show up before the exam this morning to watch the broadcast. I did a live event at Madison Southern. Thank you so much, Madison County, Kentucky, for supporting me. Lexington, Kentucky, for supporting me. And just, you know, Owensboro, Kentucky. You know, I've got a great meme about Miss Turner, who was confirmed the other day, and, you know, in the Counter-Reformation, the Baroque, and all of that good stuff. So, you know, y'all check that out. Little Bernini action there. And thank you so much, Kennedy, and Pretzel, and Jeff B, 543, Regina, it's Jason, Aaron, you know, let's see, Aaron, thank you so much for the follow on Instagram, and hope y'all do well. So let's get back to women, ladies and gentlemen. Now, as far as that goes here, we start to see this development of separate spheres and the Protestant Reformation. Now, one thing about the Protestant Reformation is we want to know that Protestants, you know, being into this sola scriptura, they are teaching people, you know, they're saying that if you're going to have sola scriptura, people have got to learn how to read the Bible. Okay, they've got to know how to read the Bible. And so men and women, young boys and young girls, need to be taught how to read the Bible. And of course, Protestants are translating the Bible in the vernacular. Let's make sure I'm hydrating here. All right. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen. All right. So let's take a look, you know, so as far as that goes now, but also the Reformation, they're not letting women preach. You know, Martin Luther, you know, certainly believed in separate spheres. Let's see, my camera got out of focus from that water bottle. Let's see if we can get it to focus again. All right, looks like, okay, we're back into focus. Excellent. And so water bottles can have that effect on cameras. But Martin Luther, he believed that, a woman's place is in the home, that most Protestant, the mainstream Protestant denominations did not allow women to preach or have leadership positions in the church. Remember, in the English Reformation, while Henry VIII got to be the supreme head of the church, it was seen as inappropriate for a woman to be the supreme head. So Elizabeth got the title of supreme governor. So she was not seen as fit to rule. Now, John Knox, of course, when Bloody Mary, the Catholic ruler, was ruling in England, he, wrote something to the effect of women should not be ruling at all. Like they should not be in positions of power. Now, part of that was motivated as a Protestant against a Catholic, but still validating these ideas of women in power. And the other thing is that Elizabeth I, although she's remembered as a great European monarch, it's not like this trickled down into like women's rights in general. That part of the reason she was successful is it's not like she tried to be, tried to do things to elevate women in society. As far as allowing women to preach. Now, Quaker worship, Quaker worship, Quakers don't have clergy. Okay, Quakers don't have clergy, and so women have always been able to participate equally in Quaker meetings. Okay, so that's as far as the Society of Friends, and so as far as that goes, ladies and gentlemen. And did I already shout out to Miss Marino's class? Pretty sure that I did. Not that, I'm trying to lead into my next thing here, quite the opposite, but the accusations of witchcraft. Okay. So remember that during the witch craze, that it wasn't, around the same time as the scientific revolution, that it wasn't exclusively women, but it was about 80% women, that nearly all of the people that were accused of being witches and were burned as witches during this time were women, and often the type of woman who might have been a little too assertive. And so at some point you start to see like a decline in midwifery, and then you start to see physicians delivering babies. But the midwife had a very, very important important role in village life. As far as women and the Enlightenment, now, as far as that goes, the Enlightenment, is really, is not really promoting feminism. Now, of course, Voltaire, this is a wonderful book here. One of my favorite books. Sometimes people recommend reading Passionate Minds, and this is about the relationship between Voltaire and Emily du Châtelet. So they had this long-term romantic relationship. Really hung on as a friendship even after the romance was gone. But Voltaire lived with her. Now, she was a married woman, but, in these aristocratic circles, because marriages at this time during the Enlightenment, marriages between aristocratic families were not love matches. That's part of what we see later in the Romantic era, that there is more of an emphasis on, romantic love. But, they were paired in what was best for their families, best for their house. And so, a man was allowed to have as many mistresses as he could afford, and an aristocratic woman was able to maintain one guy that she was sweet on. And so that was Voltaire. Now, Emily du Châtelet was a very smart woman, a gifted scientist who, if this were an era of gender equity, she would have been one of the most recognized people of her time. Instead, Voltaire was a lot more famous, and Voltaire was a popularizer. He's somebody who really, he didn't really understand Newton totally, but he understood it enough to talk to people about it and explain it to the common people. And so he popularized it, kind of like when I was talking to Miss Rowcliffe last week, in Knoxville, or was that this week? I'm losing track. Okay. I need to sleep once this is over in the worst way. All right. But, when I'm talking to Miss Rowcliffe, I'm like, wow, I'm talking to a person who about finished a PhD in history. And I'm like, wow, okay? And, she should be up here talking to people. But, I mean, I'm a popularizer. That's what I do. I take things and, explain them, but, I'm not on the level of Miss Rowcliffe and some other folks that teach the subject that know a lot more than I do. But women were not really allowed to show those things that they knew. Now, women, the role of aristocratic women, a lot of this was leading salons. And of course, this was, she's basically playing hostess. She is inviting people and she's matching company. These people would get along together and they would have a great conversation. So an aristocratic woman would host philosophers and, other guests in order to have these salons. And so I've got a whole series on women in the French Revolution, and I hope that y'all that y'all have been able to see this because it's one of my favorite series that I've ever put out there. That women in the French Revolution, you've got the March on Versailles, where these women, march to Versailles and they demand that the king and his wife, his family, come back to Paris. Olympe de Gouges. Now, one thing to notice here, and it's kind of like, one of the historical themes that you can think about, like a lot of people in U.S. history, Andrew Jackson's not the most popular person with some people. It's like, oh, well, he only helped out white men. But then when you look at the era of Jacksonian democracy in the United States, which shout out again to Mr. Gallo's class there in Tennessee. And of course, my friends at Mount Juliet High School, which they're pretty near the Hermitage, Andrew Jackson's house. And so Jacksonian democracy, you have this like equality between white men. And that's what allows, women to start thinking about, what about us? Because they're taking down elements of this, of this social hierarchy. And so as far as that goes, elements of the social hierarchy. And so if all men are equal, then what about us? And so you start to see that this movement for men's equality. So you see the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the citizen. And so Olympe de Gouges is saying, well, you know what? What about the Declaration of the Rights of Woman and the female citizen? And Olympe de Gouges, now this is what they call liberal feminism, that basically if men, have certain rights that, that they have, then, women should also share these rights from a liberal perspective. And remember that women at this time were not allowed to own property in their own right, except for certain cases where there wasn't a man who could be her custodian. And so when we think about the right to life and liberty and property, that women deserve these rights as well. So, this is liberal feminism. And then there is Mary Wollstonecraft, who wrote, first she wrote a Declaration of the Rights of Man, a vindication, sorry about that, a vindication of the rights of man, that Mary Wollstonecraft anonymously argued with Edmund Burke. Edmund Burke criticized the French Revolution, and Mary Wollstonecraft anonymously wrote a vindication of the rights of man. And she was, while Burke was coming from a more conservative perspective and saying that, they're shaking the foundations of their society, this is not going to end up well, this is not going to go well for the French, that Mary Wollstonecraft defended these liberal reforms of the early French Revolution. And then once she wrote a vindication of the rights of man, and that became popular, she wrote a vindication of the rights of woman in her own name. So, first it's like, let's, the men all should have rights. And while we're at it, women should have rights too, rights to property, divorce rights, rights to have their children protected. Remember that Olympe de Gouges said in the Declaration of the Rights of Woman that, basically, that if a man, like if a woman, has a child that, when she's married and it's not even her husband's child, that child is legally entitled to her husband's care, her husband's financial support, her husband's inheritance. But if her husband actually has a real child, a natural son or daughter with another woman, that he is not not sorry, he is sorry, it's Friday morning. He is not obligated to care for that child. That whatever he does to support, to support his illegitimate children is just out of the kindness of his own heart and not because there's any kind of legal obligation. So women, want protections for their property. They want protections for their children, and they want equal divorce rights, which were granted during the Reign of Terror, which didn't go so far as to allow women to vote, but said, you know what, women should be able to have the same rights to divorce as men. Now, in the concept outline, it does note Napoleon's limitation of women's rights. So really some of the excesses in the Reign of Terror, that Napoleon decides, you know what, let's roll this back a little bit. And so let's try to, conserve the traditional family. Remember, in the Concordat of 1801, Napoleon, makes Catholicism the majority religion. So you can be whatever religion you want, but Catholicism will be, will be prevalent here. And, one painting while we're talking about Napoleon. Okay, so, let's see, while we're talking about Napoleon, let me just bring up a painting. Last night we were talking about neoclassical art, and Napoleon is coronated at Notre Dame. And so you see here, there is the coronation of Napoleon by Jacques-Louis David. And shout out to Miss Jones's class in Justin, Fort Worth, Texas. So y'all, hopefully y'all are watching. She loves this painting very much. And so there is some neoclassical art, and you can see there where Napoleon is, you see the Catholic bishops and all of that. So Napoleon brings back Catholicism as this majority religion. And so that's something to keep in mind, that he rolls back some of these divorce rights and said essentially that a woman could only divorce her husband. She only had legal grounds for divorce if she was going to, if he brings his mistress into the house. So it's not that infidelity was enough, that he had to do something to embarrass her and to publicly shame her, and then she can file for a divorce. So Napoleon rolled back these extended divorce rights. Now, the thing is, another thing that we get here, sometimes people fall into these traps. I tell you, don't mention cooking or cleaning on your essay. Try not to do that. Kind of like, as far as that goes, thank you so much, Alex Klementovich. He has said here that Twitter is blocked on their school, but he bought me breakfast. That was so nice. Okay, so he bought me breakfast. It looks like 17 people have bought me breakfast. That's so nice of y'all to nice of y'all to do that. Thank y'all so much, those of you who are buying me breakfast. Somebody as little as $1, which I appreciate that. Very nice of y'all to do that for me. All right, so the thing is that is Napoleon, but also people act like women didn't like work throughout most of European history. Of course they did agricultural labor, and then note that first of all, women worked in factories. Now, second of all, it wasn't that great. Okay, like there was one time, where I was reading a question in LEQ about women, and somebody was like, "Oh yeah, women had these opportunities to go work in the factories," and that's not really like these dark satanic mills, as the Romantic poet William Blake put it. These are not something that hey, gosh, I get to work in a dark satanic mill. A lot of women and children, because their fingers are like nimble. And so they were good for working in these early factories, these early textile factories, but were also really like dirty, and these jobs weren't great, and they're working all the time and all of that. So women did work in factories, and it wasn't that great. Don't see this as like some kind of like, oh, wow, this was such a step forward for women. So then another feminist I'll mention is Flora Tristan. Okay, Tristan. She was a French socialist feminist, and she advocated for political rights and improved working conditions for women. Now, later on, there are responses to this, because these conditions for women are seen as intolerable, and so you've got legislation like the 10-Hour Act and the Mines Act. These laws that were passed by Parliament during the 1840s, and these laws, they limited the amount of time that that women and children could work and the kinds of jobs and such that, so basically a woman or a child cannot work more than 10 hours a day, which by today's standards should be like, oh my goodness. But, it is an effort to, protect women and children, and also to kind of shut up the Chartists. Like, the Chartist petitions are not acted upon, but there are other reforms to try to kind of shut them up. And the reason these reforms, including the repeal of the Corn Laws. Now, remember Sir Robert Peel. So when I think repeal, Peel, P-E-E-L, was the prime minister when the Corn Laws were repealed, which, allowed cheaper grain to come in from the continent, because the Corn Laws were there to protect the wealthy, like gentry Tory class at that time. And as Britain is industrializing, that class is losing influence. So that's something to consider. Okay, so consider Flora Tristan, a socialist feminist. Now, when we look at, Mary Wollstonecraft and Olympe de Gouges, that is liberal feminism. Now, these restrictions on women's work and the 10-Hour Act, these are kind of precursors to the Victorian era, where you start to see here. And before we do that, a shout out to Mr. Janice in Houston. And let me see if I can get to something on Louis the 14th at some point. So we'll see. Remind me of that later, Mr. Janice, and we'll see if we can do that. But I've got a great video on Louis the 14th. Thank you so much, Kylie McGuffey, for your follow, and Spork, and Young Bitcoin, and Maeve MJ. All right, so the Victorian era, what you're seeing here is this is during the time of imperialism. This is the time of, just European, massive industrialization of the Second Industrial Revolution. And there's this increase in, the middle class. There's an increase in white collar work. And a lot of men are able to have jobs that, can support a family. So you can have, one income. And so now the woman's job is to be in this domestic sphere, what they call the cult of domesticity, that the woman is supposed to be the angel of the house, so to speak. And, this is something that really is kind of this is really the biggest time of like very distinct gender roles. And it's at this time where you've got the suffrage movement, what I refer to as first wave feminism. Now, first wave feminism is starting around the time of the French Revolution with de Gouges and Wollstonecraft, and culminates with World War I, that women working in the munitions factories during World War I, that was something that, that was, helping, women and people, people appreciating what women are doing. And World War I is kind of that watershed moment when, European countries are recognizing the right of women to vote, recognizing women as having full political rights. And so this World War I is like the culmination of this quest for equal political rights, for being able to vote. Emmeline Pankhurst is somebody that, that is useful to remember. Pankhurst, and her daughter was involved as well. And, they would, they were very, very passionate about what they were doing. They were put in jail sometimes. And then when they were put in jail, they would go on hunger strikes, and then they would be force fed, that they would tube feed them. Now, Pankhurst was said one time to have grabbed like a jar. I don't know what a jar of vase was doing in her prison cell, but she basically, got this jar and said that if they came in there, tried to force feed her, that she would defend herself with it. And they stayed away from her on that. But a lot of these women were force fed, when they were hunger striking. Very graphic stuff that's going on there. Now, between the world wars, women have gotten political rights. So kind of like you've got a little bit of a break between the first industrial revolution that kind of wraps up around 1830 and the second industrial revolution that picks up around 1850. You've got a little bit of a break. Now, Hitler and Stalin were giving out, you see in these totalitarian states, of course, they're rejecting liberalism and really reinforcing these traditional roles that, Hitler and Stalin gave out awards to women who had like 10 or more children, that the woman is producing children for the state. And that is her job, is to be this, socialist mother who is was producing children for the state. But after the Second World War, so in the post-war era, what you've got is what I call second wave feminism. Now, this test would not require you to differentiate between second wave feminism and third wave feminism. So just note the emergence of second wave feminism. Now, what this is, looking at economic equality and social equality. So women around World War I, they're able to vote, but they're still not able to get access to what we call the professions. You're not seeing, women as professors, attorneys, physicians. They're not able to get those high paying jobs. Now, of course, in the 19th century, in the late 19th century, women start replacing men as teachers and secretaries. Okay. So, if you go back to, John Locke, John Locke was a secretary to a prominent nobleman. And so secretaries used to be men, but now, women, during, at the turn of the 20th century, women are taking jobs as teachers and secretaries. Now, of course, these jobs, were not paying what these jobs that were dominated by men paid. So women are wanting to be something more than a store clerk or a teacher or a secretary, or a domestic servant. They want, to have access to university educations and the professions. And Simone de Beauvoir in The Second Sex, okay, so after World War II, Simone de Beauvoir, who was who was not the wife of Jean-Paul Sartre, because that is kind of marriage is a bourgeois construct, and, but she was kind of a life partner. They were together the whole time. And this is really what I'd call, we talked about liberal feminism, socialist feminism, existentialist feminism. So existentialism basically rejects any type of fixed or objective truth, and it rejects these things, and that includes, like, if we think about today, you start to see the emergence of ideas of gender, rather as opposed to sex. That gender can be something that is more fluid. That a woman does not, what you have here in existentialism, and Jean-Paul Sartre writes, existence precedes essence. Okay, so as far as that goes, traditional thinking is like, you are a man, you should conform to the role of a man. Whereas existentialism says you exist. What you do with that existence is up to you. So if a woman wants to be a doctor or an attorney or a professor, she should be able to do that. Now, on the other hand, if a woman wants to be a teacher, there are so many great women out there that are teaching and watching right now. If a woman wants to be a teacher, if a woman wants to be a homemaker, there are women who appreciate those traditional gender roles. According to existentialist philosophy, a woman can be whatever it is that she wants to be, that she has total freedom. So existence precedes essence. And so in The Second Sex, Simone de Beauvoir is writing about, when you think about things that are published before the 60s and the 70s, especially, the generic pronoun is always he. And so she writes about woman as other, okay, that basically the generic human being is the male, and the woman has always been treated like something other than human. And thank you so much, Keller Sharp and Zaina, for the follows on Instagram. Big smile, Zaina. And so that, what women are wanting also is, the feminist movement after, the feminist movement after World War II. You see movements for birth control, because if women are going to have access to professional employment, then they also need access to birth control, because that way they can control when they have children, when and if they want to put their careers on hold. Because if we think about it from an existentialist perspective, that, women do not have to have children. They should not be required to do that if they don't want to. Now, if a woman wants to have 10 children, fine. But, in our, liberal societies, we're not giving out medals for that sort of thing. So access to professional employment, equal pay for equal work. So social and economic equality. Now, to close this off, we also want to mention Margaret Thatcher, okay, because you start to see women enter political life. So Margaret Thatcher, who somewhat ironically, it's like the first woman who rises up to the top of the political arena, Margaret Thatcher, who becomes the first woman to lead a British political party, the first woman to become prime minister of the UK, and I believe the first woman to become the leader of government, not the head of state, but the leader of government in a European country. She was actually very, much on the conservative side. Now, economically, liberal, okay? Free markets, laissez-faire. Remember that when we think economic liberalism in a European context, we're talking about an Adam Smith, friendly kind of economy with minimal government regulation. And so when Thatcher took over, she was called the Iron Lady. She had this very tough way about her, which, you kind of have to have in politics. They've got interesting articles about, why we've seen, women as heads of government in these European parliamentary systems, but not women as heads of government, in the, United States, for example, because of the way that these political systems are structured. But, Margaret Thatcher, very, very tough, and especially on labor unions. Okay, so Thatcher was a fan of cracking down on the unions. Before she was elected, there was what was called the Winter of Discontent. That was an exceptionally cold winter, and most of the services under the labor governments after World War II, you had not only the social welfare state, but a lot of industries had been nationalized. And so, these people were working for the government, and there are all of these strikes. And so Thatcher starts to privatize some of these industries and to crack down on union activities. Okay, remember, Thatcher was also very staunchly anti-communist, very close with Ronald Reagan. And then another thing about Margaret Thatcher is when we think about the course theme of European and national identity, that Margaret Thatcher was instrumental in, she was a Eurosceptic. Now, Euroscepticism is where, people are wanting to hold on to their national identities and not surrender things to the European Union. Now, there is hard Euroscepticism, which today, this is kind of like Brexit, get out of the European Union. And there are also some hard Eurosceptics on the continent, like, Marine Le Pen and Geert Wilders, Marine Le Pen in France and Wilders in the Netherlands. But we're probably not going to see European countries like get out of the European Union. But, you do have soft Eurosceptics who want to curb the powers of the European Union. So basically, Britain, in the European Union, they joined, but, Thatcher had her no speech. Now, she was replaced by, John Major, who was as the leader of her party, and John Major was, was a Europhile. He's somebody that wants to get into this European Union. But the British, they never went into the Eurozone. Okay, so they kept their unit of currency, which I guess is good because they're getting out now. That would be kind of weird to do your currency. So they never quite, of course, they're not quite in Europe. They're like by Europe, and they have as close of ties to the United States and Australia and all other, basically, global ties that, may not be always as strong as their ties with the European community. Because remember that the European Union, which is coming around, the European Union's coming around at the, at the time of the fall of communism in the early 90s. And this is something that, when that's coming around. Before that, this is the political union of Europe. But before that, you had the economic union. So we talk about European integration. We're talking about, the European economic community, the European coal and steel community. And Britain did not participate in those early communities. And France actually tried to block Britain's admission into these economic communities when Britain wanted to get in later. I believe at one point they did, and then Britain came in a little bit later. Now, that's something else that we've seen on the exam, is that you see after World War II, this American influence with the Marshall Plan and NATO and wanting to have solidarity with Western Europe when it came to communism. In the 80s and 90s, most kids that grew up in military families, at some point they lived in Germany. You don't run into that so much anymore, but it's like, you would typically do a tour in Germany. So, the United States military was was in Europe. They're ready to, ready to oppose communism, communist expansion if necessary. And so the French have always been very protective of their culture. And so, there were, complaints against what they saw as American cultural imperialism. And so France saw Britain's participation in the European economic community as a Trojan horse for the United States. So you see that French, French, especially like French, conservatives, they're like, look, we don't want the United States having this, this undue influence on our culture. And so, yeah, we've kind of gone from women to getting into some recent stuff with the European Union. And remember, excuse me, that theme of national and European identity. So you still have this conflict. Now, Mr. Baker's class, if anybody's watching in Blacksburg, Mr. Baker, who, we might have to do another, Europe hangout this summer. I've had him on the channel for the past couple summers. And, Mr. Baker, says that he is Scottish, British, European, and American, and he doesn't see a conflict in those identities. Okay. So, someone like Mr. Baker, has this, national and European identity. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive. Now, we're talking about national identity. Mr. Janice's class in Houston wanted me to talk about Louis XIV. And so Louis XIV, like when we think about absolutism, this is partly like this construction of a national identity, because absolutism is about reducing localism and concentrating power at the top. Okay. And really, now this isn't going to completely come to fruition. Louis XIV would have loved to have done what Napoleon did later with the Napoleonic Code, but he never quite got around to that. Okay. So, he didn't get that done. Napoleon's the one who really completes this process of nationalism. But Louis XIV, let me charge my phone, get my phone going because the charge is very low. But Louis XIV was trying to create more of a, national, more of a national state. Of course, before that, the nobles would provide a lot of the manpower for the armies. Louis is getting other sources of income that are allowing him to build his own personal royal army. Now, remember the association with militarism. Okay, so you've got, with absolutism, Louis maintained an army of, like 400,000 men, and really is fighting in the tail ends of these dynastic wars. Okay, that Louis is kind of old-fashioned in why he's fighting. He wants territory and he wants to oppose the Habsburgs and build up, the Bourbon monarchy. Now, in the Treaty of Utrecht, or as some Dutch would say, Utrecht, the Treaty of Utrecht, then Louis is wanting, like, I want a Bourbon monarch on the French throne. And he wants a Bourbon monarch on the French throne. And with that, he wants the spread of his dynasty. Now, the dynasties can't combine with each other, but he wants Bourbons there. He wants to limit the influence of the Habsburgs. Now, the British were more forward thinking about this. Okay, so the British were more forward thinking, and the British said, we want Gibraltar. Okay, which you think about, this is almost foreshadowing imperialism, because the British are like, you know what, you can have that, but we want this little piece here, which, is still British, right there on the southern tip of Spain, that controls the Straits of Gibraltar. And they wanted to advance the power of the Royal Navy. So this is kind of foreshadowing the new imperialism, that in the Treaty of Utrecht, the British are very forward thinking, that they're thinking like, look, the future is naval power. And you see with Napoleon and the continental system, that Napoleon, he said, I can't invade Britain because of their navy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attempt to instead of invading, I'm going to attempt to cut off trade. And that's the continental system, where continental Europe is not supposed to trade with Britain. Now, the Russians defied the continental system, and that's what, provoked Napoleon's invasion of Russia. But the continental system was Napoleon's plan B when you had the, the battle of the battles with Horatio Lord Nelson. You had the battle of the Nile and the battle of Trafalgar, where where the Royal Navy defeated the combined French and Spanish navies. And so Napoleon was never able to get naval security, and that's or naval superiority, and that's what stopped him from being able to invade Britain. That username is not take. Jack Lavanway, thank you very much, or Lavanway, however we say that. It's a written test, right? And let's see, Waylon Kalen Whaley, that is cool. 18-time world champion. All right, follow the main. Okay, so that's a looks like that is a fence to there. Whoa, that's actually like a big deal there. Like she's got a lot of followers. She is actually like it looks like a world champion martial artist and is about to hopefully do some martial arts on that AP Euro exam. Just remember, Kanye wants you to get a 5, and there we go. We've got that. I tell you what, that looks like a very interesting account there. And then Dank Art. Thank y'all so much. Okay, now let's go back to Twitter and see what's going on there. But let me see. I've got a few like DMs perhaps here. Let's see what we've got here. Let's see. All right, good morning from California, Miss Mills, AP Euro class at Clovis East High School. Thank you. Okay, hopefully good luck to y'all. And, that is awesome. Good morning from California. Like they're actually getting up really early. Thank you, Miss Mills class. Good luck to you. It looks like we've got, yes, thank you, AP Euro memes. AP Euro on Instagram, apeuro.memes. Great account to follow. Little shout out there. And yes, we've got Miss Kirby's class out in California, and she is feeling the dragon energy out there. Okay, so good deal, good deal. And let's see. All right, excellent. Listening to me on the way to the AP Euro exam. Susan Worley, thank you so much. They are listening to me on the way, and hopefully they're getting, wow, like in the car, they're just listening to the audio of this thing on the way. So I hope that, y'all do excellent on that, and hopefully y'all saw this, this shout out. And, oh gosh, that's pretty. We got a big exam thought. Let's see. I can't see the whole thing there, unfortunately. So she replied somewhere. So Miss Wetmore's class. So great to hear from my friends in Virginia Beach. And Bryn, if you want to, now of course you've got an exam pretty soon. The interwar years. Okay. The long version. Now I've actually got videos about Hitler, but about specifically the rise of Hitler. But YouTube doesn't autocomplete for Hitler. It's like you actually have to search for Tom Richey Hitler intentionally. The interwar years, basically, Bryn, Germany got screwed by the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, so know that. And, you had the Article 231, the war guilt clause. And so this clause here, Article 231 demanded reparations from Germany to the Allies, to Britain and France, and also made Germany give up Alsace-Lorraine, which they'd gotten in the Franco-Prussian War, and, forced them to demilitarize. And the French actually came in and raided some of their natural resources, afterwards. So the German economy wasn't doing great during the Weimar Republic, but then it kind of rebounded a little bit, and then bam, the Depression. Okay. And so in some places, by the time the Depression comes around, you've already got, Lenin and Stalin in the Soviet Union. You've got Mussolini takes over Italy in the 1920s. A lot of people, like in Italy, just like in Germany, felt like that they'd gotten a raw deal during this time. You've got the Spanish Civil War, where basically, Stalin and Hitler and Mussolini are backing different sides in that war. You've got Franco, who's really like at heart a more authoritarian conservative, but the fascists are supporting him because he is fighting these left-wing governments, and so he's making this alliance with fascists. But then again, Franco, one thing to remember, Franco was always a big supporter of the Catholic Church. So a lot of people refer to Franco as a fascist, and I don't think you'd be corrected on that. But when if you were to do that, because certainly he was aligned that way, during this time. But, fascists are not like people who protect the Catholic Church and traditional religion. Fascism and National Socialism, these are movements that are not conservative in nature. Now, of course, being a conservative rather than a fascist didn't stop Franco from killing people, but there was a lot of killing going on both, on both sides there. Now, during the Cold War, see, Franco at first, as a dictator was marginalized, but during the Cold War, Franco was seen as, he's anti-communist. And so the United States, eventually brings him in because this is a valuable ally during the Cold War. Now, on the other hand, Franco, starts to allow some degree of, light liberalization to promote tourism and stuff like that. I've got an interesting interview with Professor Sanabria on Franco that's available on my channel if anybody wants to watch that. Okay, it looks like we're starting to see folks on the East Coast kind of get ready for their exams. I'll be broadcasting probably another like 15 or 20 minutes. Remember, thank you. Many thanks to the 19 people who've decided to buy me breakfast. That is great to hear from y'all. Just the appreciation there, and of course, this is something that is free on my part, but I still have a lot of appreciation for those people who've chosen to buy me breakfast. And so, as far as that goes, ladies and gentlemen, let me see here. Okay, so as far as that goes, let me go back to Twitter and see what it is that people are wanting. I'm probably going to see an increase in shout out request is what I'm going to guess here. Oh my goodness. Okay. Wow. Jared Williams, Kanye wants me to get a 5. Now remember, on my Instagram story, I've got our gag, start off with Dragon Energy, cross it out so it won't be scored. And then when you finish your LEQ, write whatever score you think Kanye wants you to make. Jared is saying he's got Dragon Energy and Kanye wants him to get a 5. Now that is a really good Photoshop job. I just retweeted that. Jared, that is classic there. Okay, but remember, Kanye wants you all to be successful. Let's see. What have I got here? Miss Raya's class, Hannah Banana, Sunflower Person. Thank you so much. You've been supporting me for a long time, Hannah Banana, and I appreciate that. I'd really be nowhere right now without teachers. Mrs. Awad, which I may have said that wrong. It's a written test, but she is putting this review on in her classroom. Let me just thank you for everybody, that all of the teachers that are supporting me, and make sure you thank your teacher for all of the work that they've done this year. But yeah, I'm really awed just by the teachers who have decided to support what I'm doing, and given me a place in this community. I'd really be nowhere without that. So I really cannot express my appreciation enough for that. I mean, just the amount of kindness that I've seen here. So as far as that goes, yes, we've got the shout out to Raya, and thank you so much, Gina. Your name is a Kanye song. And a shout out to my friends at Pinsbury and Leah, who made this amazing, Kanye West inspired art. Oh my goodness, Miss Francis from AG in Slow. I tell you what, Arroyo Grande, yes, some of my favorite people there. And Miss Francis, hopefully I will run into you in June. Let's get in touch. Shoot me a message once this is all over. And yeah, let's definitely get in touch. She's, part of the group of people I was hanging out with on the last evening. Great conversation. I tell you, Miss Francis's class, y'all are so lucky to have her as a teacher. I mean, really. And, say hey to my friend Daniel Ha. If y'all see him, make sure to let Deha know, and Haley, and, even if you see Amina Baby running around over there, just go ahead and say hello to them for me. What a great group of people over there at AG. And Let's see, Mr. Citarella. All right, thank you so much. Glad to see that y'all are watching, and I'm glad that y'all are feeling this dragon energy. I mean, I just think, I'm just thankful that Kanye kind of some people are like, how do you do this? Okay, how is it you do what you do and you're still going? And I'm like, just when Kanye used that word, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to take that because, it really, wow, like, I mean, it just describes this. So let's see if anybody's got some, I mean, yeah, so shout outs and stuff, which I'm glad to do because we need that dragon energy. We need, to go into this thing with confidence. So remember, whenever you're experiencing test anxiety, dragon energy. Okay. And, just remember, the Kanye thing. It's just a good little gag with the readers. It'll keep them awake. Let's see, Raul, you're asking me to discuss the 30 Years' War. Now, remember that, the 30 Years' War starts off as a local and religious conflict in the Holy Roman Empire. And it becomes a continental war, and it starts to become about something more than religion. So when Gustavus Adolphus intervenes in the third phase, the Swedish phase, on behalf of the Protestants, and the French decide, you know what? We're Catholic, but excuse me, Gustavus Adolphus is fighting Habsburgs. And we've already had our own experience killing each other in the French wars of religion. And so with that, they say, you know what? Let's go and back the Protestants. Remember politique or politique, since you're taking a written test today. Politique is kind of like, an early version of Bismarck's realpolitik, that we don't need to be so tied to a philosophy that it keeps us from doing what's going to be best for our nation to make it more powerful. And so basically, the French start bankrolling Gustavus Adolphus. And then once Gustavus Adolphus dies, then you have, from there, the French get involved in the last phase, the French phase. They get involved in this too, personally. And then the Swedes start bankrolling the French. So at first, I say Swedish swords, French funds. And then in the last phase, you've got Swedish stacks, French fists, okay, or French fight, or whatever, whatever you want to do that there. But basically, the French getting involved there, and the Peace of Westphalia, which I believe the proper pronunciation of the Peace of Westphalia, but I don't like to say fail when I'm teaching AP Euro, so I just don't. And so the Peace of Westphalia, it's 1648, which is a major anchor year, okay, for this thing, because it marks the end of the Reformation. So the Reformation starts in 1517, 500 years ago and some change, and lasts through 1648. So 1648, when we see the Peace of Westphalia, we see that that Europeans will never have another continental war over religion. That Europeans are finished for the most part killing each other over religion. Now they're not finished, having religious persecution and state religions and stuff like that, but they're through fighting wars over it. So wars after that, the French are saying, look, in the next phase of warfare, it's going to be about the balance of power and about what makes our nation more powerful, not about some consideration like religion. Now, also, another thing about the Peace of Westphalia is you see that the Netherlands become independent. You have more freedom for the princes in the Holy Roman Empire, that the power of the Holy Roman Emperor is drastically reduced. So, when Voltaire said, a century later, that the Holy Roman Empire is neither holy nor Roman nor an empire, this is really largely because of the Peace of Westphalia. And so we see that the Netherlands and Switzerland become independent. The principalities, it's still the Peace of Augsburg, whoever reigns his religion, but they can now choose Calvinism as well. And it's kind of settled that freedom of private worship, okay, that we're not going to persecute people who are worshiping in private, even if there is an official religion that's celebrated in public. And of course, the 30 Years' War the Habsburgs are in decline, and we see the rise of France really kind of setting up for Louis XIV's absolutism. So France is set up to be the ascendant power in Europe, in the late 17th century and really throughout the 18th century. And so welfare states in England. Now, the thing is, remember that Bismarck started the first welfare state. This is in the late 19th century. This was part of his realpolitik, that Bismarck, now he's not a socialist, but he's like, look, I can kind of shut the socialists up if I'll do these old age pensions, accident insurance, and health insurance, that the government will provide these things. And so this is to increase loyalty to the state and to consolidate his government. And then, the welfare state is largely now another thing, you see kind of a change in British liberalism during the turn of the 20th century. You had Gladstone liberalism, which Gladstone was still like a classical liberal. He favored, limited government regulation. He disestablished the Anglican church variant in Ireland. Irish or Catholic, there's no need that they're paying taxes to support this official Protestant church. And he wanted, low taxes and, basically a free market economy. Now, David Lloyd George, when he comes in, his faction of liberals, now keep in mind that what happened during these fights between Gladstone and the liberals and Disraeli and the conservatives, they're basically jumping over each other to see who can expand suffrage the most. And when suffrage is expanded to the working class, then somebody who's going to lead a government needs to reach out to the working class. So David Lloyd George is responsible for, really the Liberal Party becomes the party that is favoring an expansion of government services and such, and an increase in taxes, whereas the conservatives start to take on economic liberalism. And that's where, you even see that today, that the Conservative Party in the UK is typically like the more economically liberal party and wanting less, intervention in the economy by the government. And of course, the Labour Party is now the bigger party there, that basically, the liberals had their heyday, but after World War II, you see that, the Labour Party is really the party that is competing with the conservatives for control of government. And I believe that every government since World War II has been led by either the Labour Party or the Conservative Party. So, liberalism, and that's something you can kind of learn, as a historical kind of thing, that, if you abandon your core principles, sometimes that might help you in the short term, but eventually you might find yourself made irrelevant. All right, so let's go through one more little round of shout outs and see what's going on here. I know y'all are ready to feel that dragon energy and declare that dragon energy, and I'm just looking forward. Just don't be anxious about that exam. Go into it. Okay. And Raul, I'm glad that I was able to answer your question. All right. And gosh, Miss Kunkelman, she has been live tweeting. If I just retweeted her, there are so many tweets, and I'm thankful for all of these tweets, but I was, Miss Kunkelman's been live tweeting this whole time. So you might want to look. If you've joined this late or you're on the West Coast and you just got here, look at her feed. She's got a lot of, things that she's been tweeting. So Educunk, you might have to go edu at EDUCUNK. I just retweeted her. You might have to go, if you go to her account, go to tweets and replies, because she's doing some of these at me. So make sure that you go to her tweets and replies and you can get a nice Twitter summary. Oh my goodness, Madsy, that is quite a meme there. I love these flaring. Oh my Lord, this is almost scary, but I'm going to go ahead and retweet that. My goodness. Oh yes, Daniel Z, who has used the meme that I put on Instagram a while back, where you can have me holding a sign saying whatever you want. People have come up with some really amusing things there. But good luck on your AP Euro exam. Sincerely, Tom. Thank you so much for that. I want everybody to have good luck. And the AP Euro class at Deep Run High School, feeling that dragon energy. That's so good to see. All right. And Bob, I've already kind of gone into Russia. Yes, the dragon energy strong with Miss Raya's class or Miss Raya's class. It's a written test, but let's try to get a Skype going sometime after this is over. I want to definitely meet y'all. Mr. Lind, and I love Mr. Lind too. Okay, so excellent. I'm going to retweet Miss Kunkelman again, make sure that y'all know what she's been doing. Go back through those tweets. She's been a big help here. And thank you, Chloe McKenzie and Mr. Lynn's class. Hopefully y'all do very, very well on this exam. So Henry, the kid, so y'all heard about the shout out, Mr. Citarella. And yes, tell Richie we love him. I love y'all too. Miss Kirby, one of my favorite people who is so hospitable to me. Also, while I'm thinking about California, let's not forget Miss Snyder's class and, the memers over there. And, Miss Snyder has always been so good to me. And really, I just, it's one of those things like John Calvin talks about grace. It's just, I don't deserve a lot of the support that I've been given, and people give me support anyway, and that really just means so much. And thank you. May I tell you what, my friend Lewis, yeah, good to know that Kanye is a reincarnation of me. I guess I have dragon energy. Lewis, a future educator. I was so pleased to meet him. Speaking of Miss Snyder, oh my goodness. Okay, Rachel, I did not see this before I swear to God, I did not see this before I shouted out to you. Okay, so yes, Miss Snyder Scholars at Culver City High School, and my friends at at South Elgin High School. Speaking of Culver, if y'all will wish my friend Ethan Culver, wish him luck in his future endeavors and his graduation. I love that guy. He brought me over there a couple years ago. South Elgin High School in the outskirts of Chicago. Thank y'all so much for watching. And let my friend Ethan Culver know that I am pulling for him in life. I tell you, what a guy. What a guy. And okay, and Saroja, we love you. You're our Peter the Great. That is so nice. And thank you, Michelle, from Miss Mello's class, SHS in California. And I'm about to go to SHS in South Carolina and go to work. Chloe, I've already gotten a little bit into the world wars. Now, I've gone into the interwar period. I think we're kind of wrapping up and kind of getting to shout outs there. All right. So, yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Miss Dunker's class. Okay. Thank y'all so much. And a thumbs up back at y'all. Okay, y'all are being great. Thank y'all so much for your support, and hopefully y'all are going to be feeling that dragon energy when y'all take that test. Okay, Callista. I can't really guarantee you that. Okay, I'm. Oh my goodness, that's so sad. Okay, so Miss Rivera's class loves me so much, and I love Miss Rivera's class, and Miss Dunker's class again. Oh, the other side of the class. And we've got all kinds of Habsburg stuff. Oh, wow, that is a very well decorated room. It's like a Germany wall where you've got Bismarck and Martin Luther. Let me show y'all this. Okay, this is. I'm gonna have to show this off because it's just so awesome. And with that, we're going to do a couple Instagram shout outs, and then I'm going to call this a day. And so there's Miss Dunker's class. That is a well decorated classroom. Thank you so much, Miss Dunker, and your students for support, and a thumbs up to all of you. Okay, so on this AP Euro exam. So thank y'all so much, ladies and gentlemen, for the support that y'all have given me. Mr. Tanzel students, oh my goodness, at Del Valley in Texas, thank y'all so much. Okay, yeah, so Mr. Tansel, if we can talk soon, because I've been looking at your ancestors, war diary from the American Civil War, and it's something I want to delve further into. So thank you so much, Del Valley High School, and will y'all please tell my friend Miss Longoria, stop by and let her know that I said hello, and she is awesome. Okay, and Miss Snyder's class, I tell you, I hope y'all do so well on that exam. And again, thank y'all so much. I tell you, it's so fun to be relevant for one last morning, right? Remember, if y'all are taking APUSH or AP Government next year, there are some things I could do to help you. I may even be putting some things out for AP World History. So remember that this journey is not necessarily over yet. And let's see, Cole Bullis on Instagram, Mr. Laffey's class from Long Island wants a shout out. Alex Angeloni, K was 1969, Super Maddie 7, Sierra Mist. Carolyn is Bet, Tiffany, Healy, Andrew S, 45 is following me. Which I tell you, some creative stuff Sierra missed, kind of like Caitlin over at Web has a very creative Instagram. Hopefully, Caitlin is confident, not cringy. Okay, remember, confidence, not cringe. Y'all want to be confident in this thing and feel that dragon energy going anytime you start to doubt yourself. Okay, do not let yourself be filled with doubt. Your teachers have done a great job. You know, all of those kids at Coral Gables High and all of these other schools with great teachers. You know, if they're watching over at Lord's and all of these other places, you know, so thankful. Sophie Webster and Andromedude. All right. And Avery M. Eow, Camson. So great to see y'all. And Ori Hammond. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we are getting to the point I am going to have to report to work. I'm thankful that my administration gave me the morning off to do this. And, you know, I'm just teachers. Again, thank you. And I will be in touch this summer. We'll be in touch next year. And, you know, it is a pleasure to be a part of this community. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, for our exam gag, look at my Instagram story for the Dragon Energy exam gag. And, you know, it's been a lot of fun. And just remember that Kanye wants you to pass. Okay. There may be people out there who are indifferent, but, you know, Kanye wants you to pass. And so do I. And it's been really fun having that gag. You know, it's always good to have something fun. And let's see if I've got somebody else here. Isabel Neville, MHS appreciates, and I'm appreciative of y'all as well. So again, thank y'all so much, and it has been a pleasure. Let me know how y'all do, and please keep in touch. It's always a pleasure. Dragon Energy, people.